My name is Jane Silverberg. I was named for my grandmother, Jane Esther Goldman. I was named for my grandmother, who died just before I was born. But her husband, David Goldman, my grampy, he lived to be about 96 years old. And I really loved him and enjoyed getting to know him a little bit. When I went off to college, he said, I landed in that city, New Orleans. And he came about 16 years old, and he came from part of Europe called Poland. It was between Russia and Poland. And he came to avoid fighting in the wars of Russia and Poland. And
about what year was that?
It was about 1870, because there were a lot of wars going on at that time. And
then what did he do once he got to New Orleans?
Well, he became a peddler. He got a horse and cart and peddled household goods from a cart. And he went all the way out to Texas. But then somehow he got back to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I don't know how. And he met a young woman named Jane Esther Goldman, was it? Or
Cohen.
That's right. And they married and had 7 children.
Did they live in Pittsburgh, or did they?
They lived in Pittsburgh, and that's where my father was born, and some of the children. But then they moved to Cleveland, Ohio, and the rest of the children were born in Cleveland, and they lived there, and that's where my dad grew up. Grampy, he was the grandparent that I knew the most. He was a very kind and studious sort of man. He loved to read the newspapers. He read often the Hebrew newspaper, which I found so interesting. And he would spend a lot of time reading, but he also spent time making wine. He liked to make wine. And every Passover, it was a great treat to have Grampy's Passover wine.
So did he eventually move to St. Petersburg?
Yes,
okay.
He did, because a couple of his children had moved here. So he and his wife, Jane Esther, moved here.
Okay.
And he lived to a great age. They had several children, as I mentioned, 7 children in the family. Aunt May was one sister, and she had my cousin Phil. And then there was Aunt Helen, who had cousins Harvey and Ted. And there was Aunt Ida, who had cousins Sidney and Aaron. And Aunt Anna, who had Hazel and Betty. And then Uncle Harry, who had Pauline. So that was a nice family they had, and they were very close. And they all eventually moved to St. Petersburg.
Okay. Now tell me a little bit about your mother's parents.
All right. My mother's mother died when my mother was very young. She was only 11 years old. Her name was Ethel Dora Jess, had been Goodman, and she married Samuel Maurice Jess, and he was a distinguished State Street merchant, very handsome, elegant man.
Was that in Chicago?
Yes, they lived in Chicago. They came. He came to this country also as a young man, and I believe he landed in New York, was it? Or, yeah, I think so. And they eventually went to Chicago, and that's where he met his wife, and they married, and they raised also 7 children. and again 5 girls and 2 boys. His daughters were Aunt Essie, and she had Margie and Eddie, and Aunt Lil, who had Buzzy and Cousin Marilyn, and Aunt Sidell, who had Doris and June, Aunt Bess, who had Ethelvira and Lucille, and Uncle Lou, who had Elaine and Raymond.
Okay. And did Samuel Jess also come from the area between Russia and Poland?
Yes, as far as I know, he
Right.
did.
And in about what time would you say that was?
I think he came in the early 1870s
Okay.
also.
Okay.
They left because if they stayed, they would have been conscripted into the Tsar's army, and they were not treated well, and they wanted to escape that and go to America,
Okay.
which was the land of gold.
Okay. Now tell me a little bit about your parents. Tell me
Well,
about your father.
all right, I will. My father was Ed Goldman, and he was a very adventurous man. He was in World War I, and he was disappointed that he didn't get sent overseas. Thank goodness he didn't, but he was disappointed. So after World War I was over, I think it was 1918, he and a friend, a buddy, decided to go to Europe and have explore the old country. So they did, and they spent a year going all over Europe, and he sent postcards home at every stop. So we have a wonderful record of his trip. And he was a very sweet, nice man, and when he came back, he moved to St. Petersburg because his brother was already living in St. Petersburg. I think he came here in 1919. And S.M. Jess, my mother's father, was here already. He had retired here. And so he met Ed Goldman, and he thought, this would be a nice man for my daughter. So he wrote to his daughter, Evelyn, who was at that time attending college at the University of Illinois, which, by the way, was very unusual in that time for a girl to be at the university.
Did dear graduate?
No, she didn't graduate,
Yeah,
but she attended, I think, for 2 years.
right. That is unusual.
Yeah. But she came here and met Ed Goldman, and they fell in love, and so she decided to stay here.
And what did Ed Goldman do for a profession?
He was in the jewelry business. He sold diamonds and jewelry, and in fact, even when he was in the Army, he was selling watches, because we have letters that he wrote to one of his sisters saying, send me some more of those ladies' watches, or send me some more of those men's watches. I'm selling them like hotcakes, he said.
That's cute. And where was his store?
Well, he had a store on Central Avenue around 9th Street. That was his first store. It was called Ed Goldman Jewelry. And then later, he opened another store around 5th and Central, a second store, and that was called Bell Jewelry and Luggage, because he had luggage and leather goods also. So he was quite an entrepreneur and always made a good living. Even during the Depression, when they weren't selling much, he decided to buy, and he bought old gold. And by buying old gold and sending it to the refiner, he was able to keep his business going.
Mm-hmm.
So he always made a good living.
That's good. And didn't he employ some of the cousins in his business?
Oh yes, he did. All of his nephews, his sister's children, all the boys, worked for him at one time or another. And they all felt like it was a privilege to work for Uncle Ed.
So who would that be? Phil Benjamin?
Yeah, he was the first to work for Dad. But also Aaron worked for a while, and Ted, and I think Harvey maybe a little. Mm-hmm. So they all worked, and they all carved their name into the old safe. So that was very special for them to be able to do that. He was a very good, kind man, and everybody liked him. He was very likable. He, for instance, when I was learning to play bridge at home, I remember I played sometimes just learning with my mother and father and Uncle Harry, who came to our house a couple of nights a week for dinner. And I would make dumb mistakes sometimes. And Uncle Harry would be a little critical. But my father, he was always so encouraging. He never wanted to make me feel bad. Mm-hmm. And that's how he was. He encouraged people. That's why his nephews wanted to work for him. Mm-hmm. He was kind of the patriarch of the whole extended family. He always helped those who were having a little hard time financially. And he was active in the community too. Mm-hmm. He was treasurer of the Chamber of Commerce and was on the Merchants Association board. He was written up in the newspaper too. My mother was Evelyn Jess Goldman, and she was a tall, slim, attractive woman. And she was very bright and very much interested in working in the community. And she always participated in things like the community chest. She became a major in the community chest here in St. Petersburg. And she worked at the Red Cross with her friend Evie.
And that was during the war.
That was during the war.
Right.
But earlier than that, she worked doing all sorts of community projects. I know that we have newspaper clippings telling of her feats in the community. I know on one major drive for the United Way, she raised more money in St. Petersburg than any other woman. She was active in the Red Cross, as I mentioned, and studied nutrition. And she was very interested in having a good diet for us then. And we always had to have vegetables and meat and fresh fruit. She also rolled bandages for the Red Cross. And she and Evie went to the USO because there were soldiers stationed in St. Petersburg, and they made sandwiches for the boys there at the USO. And it was very interesting during the war because in St. Petersburg there were soldiers stationed right here, thousands of soldiers stationed in our city. And they marched down Central Avenue, and they were all around. In fact, I was about 12 years old, and when I'd walk down Central, they whistled at me. And I was amazed by it all. Anyhow, sometime my mother would invite some soldiers to our house, especially at the holiday time for dinner. So we were quite involved with trying to do our part for the war effort.
And was your mom involved in your school at all?
Oh, yeah, in elementary school. She volunteered at my elementary school, and Mrs. Cox, the principal, said, "Oh, well, Goldie, we'll call on Goldie. She'll help us." So that was my mother, and she always was there to help.
Sounds like she was a good role model. And
She was, very much.
It seems like she maybe inspired you to
Yes.
do community service.
Yeah.
You do.
And she was very interested in politics. I remember when she was campaigning for Senator Claude Pepper, very actively, going door to door, and that's in the 40s. And that certainly impressed me very much. And later, of course, I got very interested in politics, but I think she first aroused my interest. Right. I was proud of both my parents.
You're the oldest.
Yeah.
And then you have a brother.
I'm the oldest. And 4 years later, my little brother Sanford was born, and he was a very cute boy. I thought he was kind of spoiled as a young kid. He always wanted toys that I don't know, and he had a Cushman motor scooter and would get all the stuff. Anyhow, he turned out all right, though.
Right.
He became a famous architect and studied with Frank Lloyd Wright, and we're very proud of him, and we're still very, very close, my brother and I. I was born in St. Petersburg at Mound Park Hospital, October 1930.
Okay. And where did you live?
I lived on 15th Avenue North at 12th Street in a very nice two-story house on a nice avenue. And across the street, my friend Buzz Vivlant lived. And so there were a lot of other kids on the street, too. We were always outside playing and had a very good time. And I went to Euclid Elementary School, which was only a few blocks away. And my mother started me early when I was not quite 5 into first grade because I could start with Buzzy, who was ready to start. He was 6. Anyhow, he and I walked to school every morning, and we had a very good time.
Did you ever ride your bike?
Well, I think later, when I got a little older, when we went to Mirror Lake Junior High, then that was farther away, so we had to ride bikes there. And I was very proud that I could ride all the way over to Mirror Lake. That was quite far.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to St. Pete High, and it was a very good school then, and the kids were very fun, loving, but it was serious, and we had a very strict principal, but we had fun, and I particularly liked my Spanish teacher, Mrs. Williams, because we did lots of fun things in the Spanish class, and I liked the pep rallies that we used to have. Before every football game, we would just get all riled up and full of energy to go out and root for our team.
Well, that school is still in St. Petersburg, and Joe and Evie, your grandchildren, go there. So
yeah.
That must make you proud that they go to the same high school that you
right.
went to.
It does. It makes me very pleased to think there's a continuity in our family.
Right.
It continues.
Tell me about some of your friends during your high school years.
I had a girlfriend named Irene Berkman, and she and I would often walk home from high school, and she loved to read, and she read a lot of philosophy and psychology. She taught me about philosophers like Erich Fromm and the idea that you have to love yourself before you can love anybody else. And we exchanged ideas that were very intellectual, and I really awakened to some of those thoughts for the first time because of her.
And where did you go to college?
I went to Sophie Newcomb in New Orleans. It was the women's part of Tulane, and I enjoyed that. It was quite a different experience for a very sheltered girl from St. Petersburg. And for the first time, I heard jazz music. I thought that was fascinating, to go into the French Quarter and hear this terrific music. And I loved the classes. I had a terrific sociology professor, I remember, and I had met girls from all over the country. That it was very challenging because I'd never been away from home, really. So,
was your grandfather, David Goldman, still living when you went to college?
Yes. When I went to college, that's really how I knew that he had landed in New Orleans, because when I was going there, he told me that was his old stamping grounds, he said. So
So you went to Sophie Newcomb for 2 years.
Yeah.
And then you moved on to
the University of Michigan, because I wanted to get an experience in the north. I'd never really seen snow, and I wanted to be at a big Midwestern university. So I was fortunate to get accepted to a very good college, university, the University of Michigan. And I was really excited to be there, and it was quite different because it was very large. But I, at that time, belonged to a sorority, Alpha Epsilon Phi, and it gave me a little sense of belonging to a group. So it was a little bit easier transition because of that. And I made nice friends there, and I particularly liked one of my professors there, the history professor, who I got into great discussions with. And I loved my education classes because I began studying to be a teacher. And the education teacher seemed to have an affinity for me also, because one time when he was going to be out of town, he had me teach the class.
Wow.
Which had about at least 50 students in it.
Wow.
So I was very proud. Of course, I was a senior then. So.
And how did you handle the cold weather?
Well, my mother had bought me storm coat and boots and gloves and scarves, and I loved it. It was fun.
So who came for your graduation?
Well, my mother and brother came for my graduation, and we bought a car in Detroit, Michigan. We bought a Cadillac car from the factory and drove it off the production line.
Wow. Back to St. Petersburg?
Back to St. Petersburg.
Wow.
That was our adventure there.
So then you came back to St. Petersburg.
Yeah. And I was very fortunate to get a position teaching for the following fall semester.
What school did you teach at?
I taught at Southside Junior High, and I taught American history.
To what grade?
8th grade. 8th grade. And it was challenging because I was just barely 20, and some of the kids were pretty big, and I tried to maintain authority and show that I was a grown-up. Sometimes it was hard. So I tried to make things exciting and interesting so they would like and love the class. And pretty much.
Is that school still here?
It was here until this year. They just closed it this year, 2009.
Right. And did Maya go there, or David?
Yeah,
or?
Maya went my granddaughter Maya went there for 1 year.
Uh-huh.
And I went to visit there when she was there last year, and I made a presentation for her class, and I told them that I had taught there about 60 years ago, and
Right.
they were very surprised.
All right. So then you were living here and teaching.
Yeah, and teaching, and going out with my girlfriends.
Mm-hmm.
Marilyn Benjamin was one, and Sonia, her sister, and we had some nice times together, the girls. And then,
How did you meet Dad?
well, my family, the Goldmans, were very friendly with his parents, the Silverbergs. Helen and Joe Silverberg were very close to my family. And for Passover, I think it was 1953, Passover, we were at the Silverberg home for the Passover Seder, and that was the night that Don got discharged from the Army. And he came home. We had just finished our Seder dinner, and he arrived, and everybody was very excited to see him. He had been gone for almost 2 years and had been in Germany in the Army of Occupation. So he came home, and he kissed everybody hello, and he kissed me, and I was so excited. When I went home, I told my mother and aunt, Don kissed me. And as he said, he kissed everybody. That really upset me. But it must have meant something to him too, because shortly thereafter he called me and said, do you want to go over to the pool at the club that our folks belong to? And I said, okay. And we started going swimming and sailing. There were sailboats there, so we would sail, small little sailboats. We'd sail in the bay, and we had just a good time together. And we talked and talked. We had so much to talk about. It really was fun. And then couple of months later, his friend George Timchenko from the Army, his friend, came to visit, and then Don was going to drive George back to New York City, and so he asked me if I wanted to come along, and of course I did, but my mother and dad said, oh, you can't go. But then Helen, Don's mother, said that she was going to go too and visit her brother. So she said, Jane can come. I'll be there. So I got to go to New York City. I think it was in July of 1953, and we all drove up together. And anyhow, Dad and I had a great lot of fun in New York City that summer, because his other friend, George Cooper, was there too, and he showed us New York City, and we went to some shows and did all kind of things, and one thing led to another, and Dad asked me to marry him, and I said yes. So anyhow, it was a whirlwind romance, but we had known each other for years before. Although we hadn't been close, we had known each other, so we felt that the time was right to get married, and we wanted to. So a wedding date was set for November, Thanksgiving of that very year. We got married at the Sereno Hotel, which was a beautiful, elegant hotel, very much like the Vinoy. It was built at the same time. It was a Mediterranean style, beautiful. facade. We had a very important wedding. We had an orchestra and a lot of bridesmaids and groomsmen, and it was in the ballroom of the Sereno, and it was a very elegant affair.
And now that you have spoken the words and performed the rites which unite your lives, I do hereby, in conformity with the faith of Israel and the laws of our state, declare your marriage to be valid and binding, and I pronounce you, Donald Silverberg and Jane Goldman, to be husband and wife.
Phil Benjamin, you made that recording at Jane and Don's wedding.
Sure did.
Why'd you decide to do it?
Well, because I was forced into it. In those days, those machines weighed about 80 pounds, and I was the only one with any strength, that's all. But it was very nice. Turned out good.
Do you remember the night Don and Jane got married?
I certainly do remember them. It was a very, very exciting night.
It was just gorgeous, and they both looked so beautiful and young, and everybody was so happy.
What do you remember about the night and the people?
Not too much. Everybody had a good time. We were glad to see that Jane and Donnie were finally getting together. Everybody had a wonderful time at the wedding. Janie looked gorgeous. Donnie was scared stiff.
Did you think it was a good match?
Absolutely, and we knew it would last.
Jane threw her bouquet right at me. I think she was aiming that Phil and I would get together eventually. It just took him a little while, that's all. You know, but she knows how slow the Goldman boys are. Beautiful wedding, and they really are a terrific couple.
Do you think Jane looked pretty?
Jane sparkled. She's the prettiest that I've seen my sister up until that time. She had just a tremendous amount of happiness, and it was just such an exciting occasion.
Do you have any advice for her that night?
Me advise my sister? It's the other way around. No, I don't have any. I didn't have any advice for her that I can remember.
How did you feel about having Ed and Evie Goldman as in-laws?
Well, that was wonderful because we had been friends for a long, long time and had gone places even for weekends together. We were very good friends, very close friends. So that was a very good part of it. We knew we knew the family we were getting into, and we were very happy.
Oh, I remember Jane when she went away. She had tears in her eyes when she kissed her father goodbye. And Jane and Don, they both looked so young to be getting married, which they were.
And afterwards, we went to Mexico City on our honeymoon, and that was fun because Don had been there and gone to school there for a couple of years, so he knew Mexico City and could show me all around. And it was a terrific honeymoon. We had fun. And we went to Acapulco, too.
Mm-hmm. Tell me how your life was when you were first married. Where did you live?
Well, we lived in a very nice bungalow on 5th Avenue North, 63rd Street. It was, my father had given us the house as a gift. And it was very cute. At first we got a little dog, and then we wanted a baby. And lo and behold, a beautiful girl was born in 1955, and she was just wonderful. She was the most beautiful baby in the nursery. Everybody came to look at her. And we were so proud of her, and she was just a wonderful, happy child. And
did you do much cooking for me when I was a little baby?
I'm glad you asked, because when I first was married, I didn't know how to cook or clean or anything like that. It was terrible. I tried to cook, and the first thing I tried to make was a tongue. Of all things, I tried to boil a tongue in a pressure cooker. and that very first dinner exploded. It was a catastrophe. I called my mother-in-law, Helen, and she immediately sent over her cook, housekeeper, Georgie, who from then on helped teach me and help me to cook and so on and so forth. So life got better.
I can see where I picked up my cooking skills. All right, so I was a baby.
Then you came along, and you were just a precious little girl that we loved and were pleased to have. And then next, Edward came along, and we decided we have to have a little larger house now that our family was growing. So,
but Ed was born, and you came to the house on Fifth Avenue. I remember.
Right.
You brought him home there, because I remember when you brought Ed home.
Did you?
To the Fifth Avenue house.
Yeah, Edward was born at Fifth Avenue, but we needed a bigger house, so we decided to sell that house. And then we rented a house for a short period while we had a house built. And of course, we wanted Sanford, my brother, the architect, who had studied with Frank Lloyd Wright, to design the house for us. And he did, and it was a wonderful house. It was just very innovative and very new. It was built of redwood, California redwood, and a special concrete block, and it had terrazzo floors. And it was a very unique and special. In fact, the house was written up in the St. Petersburg Times and also the Tampa Tribune as a wonderful new design. And we were very proud and enjoyed the house and loved the house. And it was a good house for our family to grow up in, because our family was growing. Now we had 2 children, and soon we had our 3rd boy, and that was Tom. He came in 1961, in June of 61. And so we had 3 wonderful children. Each had their own bedroom, and they all had to share a bathroom, but that was...
Yeah, I remember waiting down in the family room with Ed when you brought Tom home.
Oh, he was a very adorable baby and a very good child. But he and Edward, the 2 boys, tussled and wrestled, and they were always getting into it with each other. They didn't bother you because you were above the fray. You were a good student and a very helpful and good daughter and a good child. But the boys really gave me a handful. We had fun together, and we took lots of trips. Every weekend we either went to the beach, because Helen and Joe, Don's parents, had a place at the Colonial Inn, and we used to go there for weekends and be on the beach and stay the whole weekend, and the kids would play on the beach and in the pool. And you guys just love that. Mm-hmm. And we have some great pictures of you.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then as you got a little older, we decided to go on weekends hunting for some property because Dad wanted a place in the country. He wanted something in the woods. We were used to the beach, but we wanted the woods. So we went searching every weekend for property in the woods.
I remember one weekend, Dad found this property that was right next to a nudist colony, and Ed and Tom were very excited. We didn't get to see anything, but just the thought of it was exciting.
Right. Well,
but where did you end up with a...
We finally found some property in North Florida, in Mayo, Florida, right on the Swanee River. It was 120 acres on the Swanee River, and it had been planted in pine, so there was a beautiful pine forest there, and some natural woods also. So that was just exactly what we wanted. We were so delighted to have that experience.
Right. And I remember you built a cabin.
Yes, we had a cabin built on the property, and we'd go up every weekend, like Friday, and we'd come back Sunday night. Mm-hmm. And we got a special big Chevrolet, what was that? Suburban. Yeah. That had just come out, and that was good because we could put a mattress in the back, and your kids would sleep when we went up, because it would take about 4 hours almost to get there. That was the only drawback, that it took a long time to get there. But it was such a beautiful property. And
we used to canoe, I remember, on the river, Swanee River.
We bought 2 canoes, and we still have one of them. But anyhow, and there was a big tree that hung out over the river, and Dad put a rope on it, and sometimes the kids would swing out and jump into the river.
Right.
And we had a spring on our property where the water was very clear. And we brought my mother, who you children called Dear. We brought Dear up, and she thought it was just such a wonderful place. And we brought Don's mother, who you all called Gaga. Yeah. We brought her up there. And also Joe, Papa, he came one time. Mm-hmm. So.
And I remember Ed and Tom used to like to shoot BB guns.
Yeah.
There a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
And actually, we cleared the land ourselves. We cleared the land for the cabin. Mm-hmm. So it was a great experience for us to have that. And we became friends with some of the country people. Mm-hmm. One, Mr. Coons, would come and visit us, and I never forget, he would spit tobacco. Yeah. They were real country people.
Yeah, I remember that too. So back in St. Petersburg, I remember that we used to eat dinner together every night.
Yes, and we always ate dinner together at 6 o'clock. That was our dinner hour.
I remember you used to ring the bell. And we would all come running. Because we used to play out in the neighborhood. We used to play kickball and baseball right in the street.
Yeah.
Because it was a
Shell Road for a while.
Shell Road, right.
Yeah. And it was a wonderful neighborhood where the Pelham Road house was, because there were a lot of kids in the neighborhood. So there was somebody for each one of you. Terri had a girlfriend, Katie Eagle, and Edward and Tom had the Vito boys, and it was so nice that they all had children to play with. Mm-hmm. And so it was a very good house. And it was close to school.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I just remember the dinners every night. We had a well-balanced dinner.
Which I learned to do from my mother.
Right.
I didn't learn to cook from her, but I learned to have well-balanced meals.
Right. The other thing I remember is we had our own family language.
Oh, yeah. Which, again, I learned from my mother.
Right. What was the name of the language? Or
ARP.
Is the name of the language?
ARP.
Right.
I'll give you an example.
Okay.
Harpau arpar yarpu chadarpe.
far fine. So you said, how are you? And I said, fine. And it's sort of like a Pig Latin type language.
Yeah.
And it was great. We used to use it, especially when we went on trips.
And we didn't want other people to know what we were saying. Well, my mother, Evelyn, and her sister, Essie, kind of made it up and passed it on to us.
Yeah, and when I was in college, and I tell people about that, everyone thought that was so funny that we had our own language.
And the grandchildren now love to hear it.
Right, and my kids can speak it and understand it, and hopefully we'll pass that on. But then to add to this ARP language, my dad's family had their own lingo from the auction business that they'd also throw in there.
Yeah, there were words like 210 the silver set and BC regulator.
Right.
Those were expressions that they had that only we knew what they meant.
Right. And then, of course, there was Yiddish words as well.
Oh.
So we had our own form of communication a little bit.
And one thing that I learned from my father, he would tell me every night before I went to sleep, he'd say, schlaf gesund and steh auf gesund. That's Yiddish for go to sleep well and get up well.
Right.
So that was a little bit of Yiddish we spoke. And also, when anybody went on a trip, we'd say, geh gesund and komm zurück gesund, which means go in good health and come back in good health.
Right.
Those were the two Yiddish expressions that I remember.
So we had ARP, Yiddish, and a little auctioneer language.
Oh, yeah, right.
And also I remember as a young girl, we had every holiday time around Hanukkah, our cousins got together for a family Hanukkah party. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. Well, Dad and I started it when our kids were young because we wanted them to have something with their cousins. Because at Christmas, all the neighboring kids were having fun over their Christmas celebration, so we wanted to do something fun for Hanukkah, which usually comes at the same time. So we had a Hanukkah party, and we'd decorate our house very elaborately with menorahs, and we even built one out of a tree bark and did all kind of things. And we invited our cousins one night of Hanukkah. That was Phil Benjamin and Marilyn and their two children. Three,
right.
Pardon me. And Ted Whitner and his daughter, and then Harvey and Marilyn from Tampa and their three. So that was the beginning of our cousins' party, and it's continued. And I didn't tell you about my grandchildren yet, but I'd like to say maybe now about them.
Okay.
Because I have 7 wonderful grandchildren that I'm very proud of. Joe is my firstborn grandchild. I'm so proud of him. He's graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, and he's now working in Washington, D.C., awaiting entry into law school. He's just such a bright and special guy, and he is interested in the world around him, and he and I have a special bond. We both really like politics, and we really want to be a part of what's happening, and so we have a lot to talk about.
Right. And I remember when he was in college, he'd write papers, and he would email them to you to look at, to review, and to make comments.
Yeah.
I always thought that was very special because I don't know many grandchildren who send their college papers to their grandmoms to look over.
Well, he knew I was a teacher.
Right.
And he knew I was interested and especially cared for what he was doing.
Right.
So I liked the way he wrote, and I could sometimes add a thing or two. And,
right.
And especially give him encouragement. That's what he liked and needed.
Right. And then there's our daughter, Evie, Evelyn, who was named after your mother,
my mother,
Evelyn Goldman.
Yes. And she's a beautiful and very energetic, self-sufficient, bright girl that just always seems to find her way. Wherever you put her down, she comes up.
And where is she now?
She's at Boston University in Boston as a freshman and doing very well, just exceeding and excelling in everything she does. And I'm very proud of her. You're married to Jay Gross, who is a fine, wonderful man who we're very proud to have in our family. He's made a good success of his business, and he's made a good contribution to this community, and he's been an excellent father. And then my son Edward has 2 children, Rachel, who's a very fine young woman, and she's at St. Pete College and doing nicely, and Noah is Ed's son, and he's in Tallahassee going to college, so he's doing well. He's a freshman. And then...
And Rachel and Noah are very good athletes.
Oh, very
always,
good athletes. Yeah, they excel in athletics. Rachel was on her tennis team at her high school, and she's taught tennis to other children. And Noah was the captain of the football team at his school, Farragut High School. So they're both excellent athletes. Right. He also was in field and track and did real well and got letters in high school. Right. So they're both very good athletes.
And then what about Tom and Chevy?
And now Tom and his wife Chevy, who's a terrific young woman, born in Israel, and both living here now. And she's a dynamo. She's a terrific mother and wife for him. And anyway, their children are awfully bright and nice. First there's Maya, who now is 12 and a half, and a good student and a wonderful ballet dancer. She's been in a lot of shows. Every year she's in the Nutcracker ballet. And then there's their son David, who's a very sweet, good boy and interested in everything. He loves to play baseball, and he does a lot of the Little League baseball games. And then the youngest is Sarah, and she's a ball of fire, I call her. She's exceedingly smart and has a beautiful handwriting and very good in school. And just, they're 3 wonderful children. And in fact, all 7, thank God, are terrific, healthy, strong, and bright. And I'm so proud of every one of them. I became interested in politics, and I ran for the St. Petersburg City Council in the 60s. And because of my involvement, I got appointed to the St. Petersburg Housing Authority. And that was an important position because it affected the lives of many people, and I really felt we were able to accomplish a lot of good things. Ed Rogal was the chairman, and we worked very hard to see the Jordan Park and the Rogal Center were functioning at top speed.
And did you do any campaigning in those years?
Well, I also became interested in national politics, and when Lyndon Johnson was running for president, I campaigned very hard for him. In fact, set up a campaign office at St. Pete Beach for him that I headed up. And because of my involvement, Dad and I were invited to Lyndon Johnson's inauguration when he became the president. And so that was an exciting time for us to go to Washington, D.C. for the first time and go to the inaugural affairs. There was the inaugural ball, so on. It was very beautiful.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
And then what happened back in St. Petersburg? When you came back in St. Petersburg, what with the garbage workers? And
yeah, well, things were going on that needed attention here. The garbage workers were striking, and they had very unfair conditions at the time, and many of us felt that they needed support. So I, along with some friends I had made, professors from Eckerd College, we marched with them down Central Avenue and right up to City Hall. And it was a very dramatic time because there were a lot of people who thought they couldn't understand it. But we felt there was an injustice, and we had to have peaceful protests. And we accomplished our mission. They got better wages and better conditions, so we felt proud of that. And during that time, I met a few very fine black people. Bet Wimbish was a very intelligent, beautiful black woman that I became friendly with, and also Edith Alsop. They were doctors' wives that were wonderful companions for me, and we became good friends and invited each other to our homes. And I remember going to Bet and Dr. Wimbish's home, and we just had such fun dancing and just having great social times together. And it was a wonderful awakening for me, because I began to see black people as wonderful, intelligent human beings, and not just as a serving class that I had always known before.
And how was it when you went out to dinner with them, couples?
We integrated several places. Dad will tell you about that.
Okay. All right.
We integrated several restaurants because of going to them. I thought that I should do something challenging, so I began writing a newspaper column. It was called Serving Seniors, and at that time Social Security, Medicare was just coming out. So a lot of people were confused about it, as they are now with the new health reform. And I began writing and interviewing people and writing down the interviews, and it was a good column, and it was accepted into papers all over the country. It became syndicated, and it was in the Nashville Tennessean and the Salt Lake City Deseret, and beside the St. Petersburg papers. It was
right. And I remember your names were David and Esther Elston.
That's right.
And I remember that you and Dad posed for a photo, and you tried to make yourself look like senior citizens, and they put like powder in your hair and everything.
Right.
And in the newspaper there was a little picture every week or whatever it was of you.
Yeah,
and
twice a week.
Twice a week.
Yeah.
And I remember there was letters. People would send letters, and you would answer the letters.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I remember you saying that you answered every single letter that you ever got. I remember seeing you get stacks and stacks of mail.
Yeah, that's right. We
sitting
did.
there at our house on Pelham Road, and you going through all the mail.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was a challenge, and I did it for about 5 years. But then Dad opened his own business, and that was in 1968. And so I couldn't write the column. I couldn't answer all the mail anymore. And
So
had to help Dad in his new business. It was called Silverberg Jewelry Company, and it was down on First Avenue and Second Street, and in downtown St. Petersburg. So I helped him. I did the books. I sometimes waited on customers, and helped. And I made his lunch every day. There was a little kitchen there. I made him a hot lunch every day.
Did you do any buying?
I did. I bought the gold jewelry. Dad bought the diamonds. I bought the gold jewelry.
Right. You kept the books.
I kept the books, and I hired anyone that we needed to hire. So it was. I wore a few hats, and I liked it very much.
And probably wrote the deposits.
Yes, and had to take the deposits to the bank every day. And if a piece of jewelry needed repair, I had to run it up to the repair shop, which was a few blocks away.
Right.
So I kept busy.
Right. And I remember we all worked there as,
we
young
always
kids.
We always called on our kids to help, and they did. And especially I remember when we would mail out some
catalogs.
Publicity
Right.
information, and we'd bring home all of the material, and around our dining room table we would have all our children and their friends helping us put labels on and
Right.
sort the mail. So
Right.
everybody had to help.
Right. Okay. And then once Dad got the business underway, I think you went back into politics, I remember, in the mid-'70s.
Yes.
And
I did. I ran for office again, and this time for the state legislature. That was kind of an exciting time for me. I ran against a fellow that was an incumbent. He had been there a number of years, and he was a Republican, and of course I was a Democrat, and at the time this county was very much Republican. So it was a very difficult campaign, and I came close to winning, but didn't quite make it.
Right.
And afterwards, I was disappointed, but Dad said, well, it's Beshert, which means maybe it was meant to be, because your family needs you at home, and not to go up to Tallahassee a few times a year.
Right.
So that
I remember the year you ran, it was 1976, and it was our country's bicentennial.
Right.
And I remember that Ed rode his bike across the country for bicentennial, and he was wondering, he was one of the youngest ones to participate.
Yes.
And if he could do it, he wasn't sure, and he said, if I can run for office, you can ride your bike across the country.
And he did. He did such a great job. He was, as you said, the youngest one in his group of about 10, who started on the Atlantic Ocean and rode the bike all the way to the Pacific.
Right, and I think it took him
82
days.
82 days to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so.
And of course, this was way before cell phones or anything. And I remember he would, every few days, he would find a payphone and he would call us, and we were so excited to hear from him.
Right.
One time, I remember he was in the Kansas or something, in the plains, and it was super windy.
Yeah.
And
I think they were having a tornado in Kansas. He called. We were worried.
Okay.
But thank God he made it.
Right. So you've been involved in many, many community
efforts,
and I remember that you were very involved in the American stage. Can you tell me a little bit about?
Starting about, I guess in the 80s, I think it was in the 80s, American Stage, that's our theater group in St. Petersburg, was getting started, and I became involved with them and went on the board and helped direct them through their early years. and they've grown into a important theater group here in not only St. Petersburg but the whole Central Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And
Now, I also remember you were very involved with St. Pete College. And can you tell me a little bit about that and how you got involved?
Well, my cousin Phil Benjamin, who I was very close to, was active with St. Pete College, and because of my admiration for him, I felt we should participate in St. Pete College too. And in those years, our business was doing well, and we had some money to contribute to a charity or an educational fund. So one of the things that Dad and I thought would be important was to help start a trust fund at St. Pete College because they needed extra help. And so we set up the Silverberg Fund for Educational Excellence. And every year, one of the departments petition to have a grant, and they do extra special things with that money that they couldn't ordinarily do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
so nice.
Yeah, it's been a good rewarding experience for us, and I guess good for the college.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also, I remember that you got involved with painting for many years, and you did a lot of watercolor painting and acrylic painting.
Right. And I got started working with a very fine teacher, Judy Dazio, and enjoyed her classes for about 15 years. I'd go once a week on Thursdays, all day Thursday. And when you're studying, you produce. So I got very involved with the painting, and maybe because of my interest, you became interested in painting.
Right.
And so you took off and really went to town with it. Mm-hmm. So we both had great enjoyment with our paintings and have showed our paintings in some shows. So that was a very nice experience.
So what are some of the activities you are involved with now?
Well, now I volunteer one morning a week at my grandchildren's school, Lakeview Elementary, and I lead a reading circle one morning a week and discuss a book that they're reading.
And what grade is that?
It's 5th grade now.
So, Mom, tell me a little bit about the Holocaust Museum.
I'm a docent at the Florida Holocaust Museum, and I show students through the museum and explain the evils of the Holocaust. I tell how important it is to stand up against evil. I want them to be an upstander and not a bystander. Well, I just want to conclude this nice interview with you by saying that at 79 years old, I hope I don't cry. I have so much to be thankful for. I have a wonderful husband. We've been married 56 years. And although we fight a little bit, we love each other very much. And I have wonderful children that are so good to me and Don. And we are very close to each other, all of us. And our grandchildren we're close to and we love. So, and I have such nice friends, some of which I've had for my whole life, like Marilyn and Sonia and Buzzy, and have new friends like Betty Sembler and Alan Samuels, and I just and Ramona Updegraff. I have so much to be thankful for that I just hope for a few more good years like the ones I've had, and I'll feel that it's been a good life.